Stand for the pledge. Mr. Mansour, will you lead us?
Sure. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the Township Board of Trustees Committee of the Whole meeting for Tuesday, August 8th. And I'd like to call the meeting to order. And do I have an approval for the agenda?
I make a motion to approve the agenda for August 8th.
Support. Okay, there's been a motion, support, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we'll open the floor for public comment at this time. Is there any public comment? Good evening, Mr. Ert.
Good evening, Ed, 7212 Porter Road. I hope I don't mess.
You might want to pull that microphone down a little bit.
Okay, you hear me better? Whoop.
Because our minutes are going to be recorded and
Oh, look at there.
Oh, no.
It's alive. How about sideways?
That's
you go.
good.
Is that okay?
that's better.
Okay, Ed, 7212 Porter Road. I know we don't seem to have the whole board here. I just want to bring up, I attended the task force meeting between the city and the township
For the fire?
for the fire. There were some bold statements made there. One of them was city's comment about the transfer of funds being illegal. Our previous board, the township board, came to the plate. The city stuck their head in the sand. There was a problem with financing in the fire department. The township board did something about it. The city did nothing. They just did nothing. Something needed to be done, and our board did it. And I appreciate them stepping up to the plate and doing something about it. The mayor made a comment. The partnership is fair at 86-14. I don't know why she made that comment that it's fair. Then why do they have so much say in the fire department and commission? There's 5 seats on the commission. Each seat's worth 20%. The city doesn't even have a right to a seat. They're only 14%. I don't call that fair. The population in the fire district is not totally covered correctly. Of the fire department, the city is 14% of the contribution, 14 square miles of the area and population. They should have 14% of the say, not 50%, not 40%, not 20%, 14%. It seems when things come up that benefit the city, they're willing to talk. But otherwise, they're not willing to talk at all. The subject came up about the kitchen. The city council, the mayor said that, well, we had a new council person on the board. They didn't know how we operate. They didn't know better. They're sidestepping it. They would not address the problem. When are they going to pay for the kitchen that they own? They sidestepped it. I wanted to bring this observation from being out in the public and looking at what goes on in a meeting. It seems the only thing the city is concerned about is in keeping the inadequate station number 1, no vision for the future, especially for the township. Station 1 may be adequate for the city, but it's not for the township, not for the 86% of the fire district. It won't hold a ladder truck. The traffic is jammed around it when they got to get out. So that's why I say this is not a partnership. It's the tail wagging the dog. The partnership is obviously an obstacle to success for this township. The questionnaire that was brought out at the task force meeting, it was obviously being sidestepped. Nobody wanted to deal with that. It's not in the city's interest to deal with the problems. Our fire department is more than 8,000 people, more than 4 square miles, more than $200,000 worth of funding, and more than just Station 1. I don't know what more I can say about it. So I'm trying to prompt you from what I see when I'm in the public and watch this discussion going back and forwards. And it was a one-way street. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hurt. Any other public comment? Okay, seeing no other public comment, we'll move on to our next agenda item, and that's Ms. Jill Bain from Giffords Webster, Principal Planner, and she's going to give us a presentation on solar energy and the need to develop appropriate zoning for the township to be prepared for advances in alternative or renewable energy. Welcome, Ms. Bain.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I have a short presentation for you that will just give an overview of some of the issues surrounding solar energy and its potential use within the township. And then we can talk about questions and answers and anything else that you want to talk about relating to that. So again, so the overview, solar energy systems, what are they? How are they classified? What are the potential impacts? And what are the areas of consideration that the township should be considering? As you know, solar energy is a process of converting sunlight into usable electrical energy, and there's three different types, two different types really, photovoltaic and the concentrated solar power, and then the third is like a hybrid or a combination of those two things. So photovoltaic solar is the kind that you typically would probably think of first when you think of solar energy. They're solar cells that convert light into energy through absorption. We've seen them for years on our calculators, the little pads on there that absorb the light and transfer it to a semiconductor material, and that's what causes the electric current. Typically, that's what we see here in Michigan. You may also hear it called solar thermal. That's the heating of the water or the air. The PV, or photovoltaic, it's much easier to say PV, is generally describing the electricity producing energy rather than heating the water or the air. And so here's some examples that you might see in and around our area as well as in the region. The concentrated solar power is using lenses and mirrors to really focus the sunlight in on a small beam, and that's where the power is generated. It's less popular here in the United States and tends to need a very, very vast area. It's typically just a large-scale industrial setting, and when I show you the next picture, you're going to be like, yeah, we don't want that here. This is a little bit closer in, and you can see how those panels are curved in and how they're really focusing and gathering that kind of energy. Typically, when you have some sort of solar system, you're going to have an inverter, which is going to convert the DC current into the AC current that we use in our homes and our businesses. And there's also ways that they can monitor energy data and other components of the system as it's connected. So we typically are going to see in communities, and we're starting to see this, where they're having generated electric currents from the PV systems on site. And that happens a lot in residential settings and some business settings too. And then there's also the utility energy that's created. And that's a separate type of facility and needs a different kind of more land. So on-site generation is typically just what we're going to be using to generate to supplement or to replace the kind of energy that we're getting from the utility companies. If you have an on-site energy system, sometimes you will have more energy that you need that you can use on your site, and you may feed it back to the utility system. Those typically aren't considered to be utility energy systems. Those are just supplemental energy that's going back. So usually when we see these in a residential and commercial settings, it's rather simplistic. We call them small, medium, and large. Small energy systems are either rooftop or in-ground photovoltaic systems that are typically on smaller lots in dense areas, on residential or business uses, and these are almost always all on-site energy systems. They simply aren't large enough to produce enough electricity to be considered utility services. Medium can be either, depending on the energy needs of the location that has these systems in place. They're primarily for businesses or open spaces. They can either be on-site generating or utility energy systems. And then larger energy systems, you may hear the term solar farm used from time to time. You might start hearing that a little bit more often. You'll see that either in a business or industrial setting or in an open space setting. These are typically utility energy systems, but they could also support a large-scale on-site energy use as well. This picture is actually from the University of Michigan, from North Campus. They have an installation there. So what are the impacts of solar energy systems? I think probably the first one that more people would think of would be aesthetics, although community safety is still important. Noise, you don't necessarily think of the noise associated with this type of use because it seems like a quiet use. Glare, though, is something that has been a problem. Environmental concerns, traffic, and property values, these would all be things that we might think of when we're thinking of any type of use that might be coming into the community. These would be some of the factors that we might think about. In terms of safety, solar panels and their components are safe. They're typically made of glass and aluminum, encasing the silicone and the quartz material. They're always encased and they're usually protected from the elements, so there's not really an issue of leaching into the environment or any other kinds of issues with that. The inverters do emit electromagnetic energy, but it's very small and it's similar to other utility generators or inverters. And they're always designed to be compatible with National Fire Code standards and do not increase the risk of a fire to a site. So those are important things to think about. From the aesthetic side, they can really vary greatly. You'll see them on rooftops. You'll see them standing there next to this house on the bottom picture as just a standalone pattern or panels. But we're also starting to see them used in being incorporated into other structures. So the image on the top shows maybe a pergola or some sort of a breezeway connection on a home, or it could be a business where you'd have those panels that are able to generate electricity over something that was just maybe there not generating electricity before. So trying to incorporate that. You may also see them as the first image that I had on the cover slide, or the second one, where it was covering up a carport structure. And so the solar panels were covering something that's already there, so you might as well use that space to be productive. The trends in solar energy production are to make those panels smaller and more efficient and more aesthetically pleasing. Typically, we won't notice the rooftop solar installations as much. And again, the ground-mounted ones can be incorporated into other types of structures. Solar systems are very quiet. They can sometimes have a little hum associated with the electric converter equipment, probably similar to an air conditioner, if that. If they're a larger unit, you may have a larger amount of hum noise, but it's not really something that's going to need significant mitigation. Glare had been an issue, but now they're typically designed to reduce the glare because they're really trying to absorb as much energy as they can. So they are using textures, a matte surface, any kind of anti-reflective elements, because they really do want to absorb as much as possible and not have it bounce away. We have heard concerns from some folks about a potential wildlife impact. They're fairly benign to that. They really don't cause much trouble. As you can see, they're open typically on the bottom. They may be adjustable, but the animals, birds and squirrels and whatnot can usually go back and forth and around them without much concern. They are protected from the electrical equipment and the inverter, so that's really not an issue. For some of the larger systems, they may want to have the fencing around those just to keep some of the deer or larger animals just out of the area. But that's standard for any kind of maybe a large-scale farm or something of that nature that you would see anyway. So it's not really something that's much different. Traffic impacts, we don't really see much traffic generation. You may see things when larger facilities are constructed, but after that, it really is not much of an issue with it. We don't really have any studies that show that there's an impact one way or the other on property values. We did find a study based out in California from several years ago that found that on-site solar energy systems did tend to increase the value of a property once installed. And if they're properly maintained and they're aesthetically pleasing, or otherwise screened, it's unlikely to have any sort of a negative impact on any of the neighboring properties. And as we recommend, an enforceable, well-thought-out solar energy ordinance would be supportive in the effort of maintaining the property values in the surrounding properties. And this is another example. I think this is kind of a cool example of just at a residential home, a patio that's going to have maybe an umbrella or some sort of shelter over that table anyway, just to go ahead and put those photo panels on there. I think that's a really interesting way to generate a little electricity. So if we're thinking about writing ordinance language to regulate these, to allow them and regulate them, these would be some of the other things that we would want to consider. We want to define the system type. So when I talked about small, medium, and large, having some definition behind that to support so people understand what they are. Thinking about maximum heights, setbacks, where they should be placed, drainage, concerns. Lot coverage, other landscaping or screening that might be necessary, abandonment or disrepair regulations, and how they would be approved. So we'll go a little bit through that here. And these different types may be appropriate in some districts and may be not appropriate in other districts, and that's something that we can talk about. This would be just a suggestion that the small solar systems could perhaps be permitted in all the districts. That if they're on-site use only, so they're not utility generating, they may give some energy back to the utilities, but it's not their primary function. That if they were roof-mounted units and maybe even ground-mounted, that they didn't exceed a certain square footage, certain area, or certain height, there's really no reason why they couldn't be permitted in all residential districts, as well as all the commercial districts too. The medium sized ones, we may see those more in non-residential districts, and they may be rooftop or ground-mounted. They could be on-site or utility systems, and maybe we'd have a certain size limit with those too. And then the larger ones, permit those in industrial districts, or maybe there's another opportunity in an agricultural district with a certain size property that might be appropriate as well, and for those size limitations and maybe some setbacks and other issues. Ground installations are typically allowed a height of up to 20 feet, and they can be as low as 5, and then considering what rooftop installations would be, perhaps limiting those to 5 feet above whatever the maximum building height is, just to allow for flexibility and directions and placement of those. And that's just another, some additional height considerations for standalone patterns. We have had an application somewhat recently for, it was a single-family residential home, and the panels that they were putting forward that they wanted to install, once we measured it, it really wasn't any different from the accessory structure standards that we already have. So the maximum height there is 14 feet, and then there's limitations on the area and total areas of all accessory structures, and that seemed to match up with that. So that may be a good basis for moving forward if we were to think about what kinds of restrictions or regulations we would put on residential structures. Those smaller ones could probably be approved administratively through the township's permitting department, building, electrical, and then larger scale systems would probably want to be reviewed by the Planning Commission. And then the utility uses, the larger ones, maybe the solar farms, we might consider those to be special land uses depending on where they are. Setbacks, again, this can be something that is varied by district. Perhaps if it's next to residential, we might set them back a little bit further, but in keeping with probably some of the other structures that we permit on site. Glare is becoming less of an issue, but still we want to make sure that we at least ask applicants to provide documentation that glare is going to be reduced as much as possible. And that may involve additional relocation or placement of the panels if they're installed, just to make sure that neighbors aren't getting glare into their homes. Drainage, typically on a smaller scaled system, you wouldn't really have an issue with that. But if they are larger, then a drainage plan would probably be appropriate, because it is, even though it's not completely covering the ground, it's covering some of the ground, and the water will go someplace. And so this is just a nice little example of how one community required some screening right around there, a little drainage area, which looks kind of nice in a park. Lot coverage, there may be something that we would want to limit how much of a lot is covered by these structures. And we can look to other types of building restrictions that we currently have to get some guidelines for that. Landscaping, the township has a good job, does a good job of requiring greenbelt screening and buffer screening between uses, and this might be something where we wanted to add in this type of use into that as well. We have some landscaping language, but we don't have to get into all that. Abandonment or disrepair regulations, that's something that's important to keep in there should a system be not used any further, to make sure, just like we do with wireless communications facilities or other structures, that they be taken down when they're not in use. And so that's just a kind of a quick overview. I'd be glad to answer any questions that you might have.
One of the things that I've been watching is there's a company that makes an electric vehicle that actually has come out with, or is in the process of coming out with, roofing shingles.
Yes.
That will be
Joe Tingari
People.
from my office he's on the wait list for those.
Is done, what?
He's on the wait list, yes. Yeah,
Okay.
he's gonna get those
Okay,
as soon as they're, and I think it's already been, I think he said it's already been a year that he's been on it.
okay,
Yeah,
I better get on there.
you
But
gotta get on the wait list.
it's supposed to be less expensive than asphalt shingles,
Yes.
supposedly. You mentioned that there's no additional fire risk, but that would be if, obviously, it still gets the inspection that
Yes.
our electrical inspectors would go through and what have you. And I imagine that we would also have something that would look at the appearance of this. So for example, if I put one on my roof, but I decide to, I don't know, extend it 6 feet above, you know, there's gonna be some type of ordinance or requirement that has
Right.
to
It
fit.
seems like 5 feet is what most communities are allowing, so you could go 5 feet higher than
In your roof?
the maximum roof.
Okay,
Or if you have a low house, you might not necessarily want like a 15-foot high
right,
solar panels. Maybe it's just 5 feet over the existing roof
Mm-hmm.
line. So that might be a way to kind of keep it in scale.
yeah. I'm just worried about the appearance. I mean, I can see where they could look good, but, you know, I look at commercial buildings where we shield, you know, the air conditioning units,
Right.
you know, from view from the road. And I'm thinking you drive down the street and everybody has a different setup on their roof of, you know, some have, you know, just angle iron that they put them up there with, and other people may have, you know, wood. I don't know, I'm just envisioning it.
Like
And
a
it's probably
hodgepodge.
far-fetched to
Right.
think that that's gonna happen overnight, but,
Right, and you may have some that when they go up initially, they're state-of-the-art, and 3 years later, there's a whole new technology that has them beat.
right.
So it's kind of hard to get ahead of the game
Yeah.
on that. But I think if you call out the materials that you would expect to see up there, like, you know, maybe you would say no plastic mounting systems, or it's got to be within 5 feet of their existing building height.
Right.
If you could say they should be on the rear side of your roof whenever possible, that might help as well.
Right.
Just to try to have some consistency.
Unless you have a big grove of trees behind your
Right.
house.
Right.
Earl?
Yeah, and of course it does go into storage batteries. Is that where it's going when it generates it off the panels, or does it stay right in the panels?
A lot of them are having their own their battery systems where they're containing that. There's only so much they can contain on site, though.
Right.
So some of them will reverse back and send things back to the electric company.
So there isn't that many batteries in the house like in a residential one then, right? Because it just generates it, and then there's probably a bypass valve that says, okay, the rest of it will go back to the utility then?
If they're fortunate to generate that much, yeah.
Right, if they're not, then it's not
Then
really an
it's
issue, so
easy,
there won't
yeah.
be any batteries at all then probably, is what you're
There
saying.
might not be, because I think the batteries are fairly expensive at this point. as
Right.
well. So
And,
people are kind of using what they have.
you make a good point, that you have to generate a lot to store it. If you don't generate that much, or you can't generate that much, you don't need the battery anyway,
Right.
because you can't
So
really
some people
store
are
it.
using them for very specific purposes, like maybe they would have a covering over a swimming pool or next to a swimming pool or a hot tub or something where they want to just generate, or maybe their sprinkler system, they just want to generate enough electricity to run those supplemental items. Maybe they're not
okay.
they're running their whole house off of it, but there may be certain elements that they're,
Right, but
gonna
you'd
use
think you'd
that.
want to try and do the whole house, and I
Yeah.
think some people
if
have.
you
but-
had enough room and you had enough space on your roof,
Right,
Charge your car.
Yeah.
and you're going to be there for a while.
Mr.
And-
Massey?
Do you have, excuse me, do you have any information on the cost benefit?
I think it depends on it's a good question. I think it depends on the system and how many panels you're installing. I think people are finding that it still takes several years to recoup the cost. And I think that cost will it's continuing to come down every year because the technology advances. But I don't know specifically at this point, if you bought a system today, how long would it take you to pay it back? I think it varies.
Yeah, Mr. Guzzo?
yeah, the only other question, would there be special training that our inspectors would have to have? I know if we set requirements like 5 feet, this and that, that would be basics, but is there any other training they'd have to know?
I don't know the answer for sure, but I do believe it's in the building codes and the electrical codes, because these have been around for some time.
Right, so it's already out there then?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Obviously you've researched this, and I just briefly looked online earlier today at any news articles related to ordinances with regard to solar, and I really don't see a whole lot of issues with it other than the solar farms that.
Right, the large scale.
Right, those, you know, looks like the number of acres that you're required to have in order to have so many, you know, square feet of panels or whatever is pretty much the only area that I've
Right.
seen that's kind of an area of contention.
It is. And you have, I think there's a couple issues. I think in some communities, there's a resistance to turning over certain areas to either, like if they're an industrial area, do we want to give up an industrial area for this rather, I mean, it's a low intensity, low employment, that specific
Okay.
instance, you know, low traffic use, very passive. And then there are other instances, I think, where maybe, bless you, there's agricultural properties where people say, well, let's turn it into a solar farm. And they think maybe there's some concern about using up our agricultural lands for those kinds of things. So sometimes I hear of those kinds of concerns. But it depends on the community. And I think, you know, there's certain places where it could really be it's a nice sign of being progressive and embracing new technologies. And so I think there's some value in that as well. So certainly depending on the size of the parcel and where it's located.
What if they want to cut down a whole forest of trees to put those up? No, I'm just kidding.
We have an ordinance for that.
We've got a tree ordinance.
We do.
Or maybe they can just stick them on the trees, you know, mount them to the trees, huh?
There you go. Any other questions anyone has?
Bill, it's been around for a while, and, but how much danger would we be in of not taking an action, making sure that
Well, we have had some interest. We've had some inquiries from a couple of larger scale solar operators who would like to put in some larger installations. But we don't really have anything in place. As I mentioned, we had a small application for a residential unit. And I don't recall how big it was, but it was certainly like no bigger than a carport or a shed. And we were able to approve that because it met all the other requirements of our zoning ordinance in terms of being an accessory structure, which is what we classified it as. But something on a large scale, we really don't have anything to, we have nothing to direct that, nothing to guide that.
So if I had an empty lot next to my house in a subdivision, and I thought, you know what, I can put a bunch of these panels on that lot in between my house and my neighbors, would I be able to do that right now?
You probably wouldn't be able to do that.
Right now, though, since we don't have an
No,
ordinance?
No, because you could probably put a couple of smaller ones out.
Right.
If they were, if they met the requirements of your accessory structures. So you're only allowed to have whatever, a certain size limit or a certain percentage of your main floor can be accessory structure. So we've got a couple different standards depending on your lot size. And if it fell within that, then you'd be able to do it. But if it was exceeding that, then no, you'd only be able to do the smaller units.
But if I have an additional lot, that would probably qualify as a whole.
Depends on how big it is.
Okay,
But yeah, and there's only so much you can do.
There's
You
only
couldn't
so
fill the
much you
whole
can
lot
do.
with it.
okay.
Yeah, and probably maybe 15 to 20 years ago, there were solar panels that they were, you know, selling, and the government was giving rebates, because I know a lot of people, you know, could get the rebate off their tax return. And we had them on homes, so we must have some basic ordinance for the retail anyway, out there already, because there was a lot of homes that had those small triangles on their roofs.
Yeah.
And
I
a
think
few of them are
that-
still in Grand Blanc, and I see some of them on the side of homes, you know, black panels.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's the basis you're saying, it. The residential is kind of covered, it's just not
I
the-
think it is for a small scale, although I think that perhaps there could be some additional standards in place.
Right, right,
Like
'cause it's
for
been
glare reduction.
quite a while.
Just to make sure that
They were okay.
they're protected, yeah. And to make it clear, it never hurts to be clear in your ordinance what exactly
Right.
you mean. If you believe that a solar energy systems are accessory structures, and we might want to just say that in there and make those things clear. But I think if the township board was interested in having the planning commission explore larger scale uses, that might be something that they would be interested in studying.
Yeah, we need to do
I
that.
think that'd be advisable.
Right, that'd be good.
Fine. I will share that.
Everybody else in concurrence that we need to have the planning commission look further at this?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll give it to Mr. Mansour to take
Yep.
back.
I'll take that back and add it to the queue of other ordinances that are
Okay.
in
You're
need
on
of,
our list, huh?
in need of revision or at least an update.
Okay.
Excellent. Well, good.
All
And
right.
I can share the same presentation with them.
Okay,
I don't know
very
if we'll
good.
have time to do it next month, but we'll try.
Any other questions for Ms. Bain? Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Joe.
Okay, at this time, we're going to review our Township Board agenda for our meeting on Thursday, August 10th. And we will have a presentation to one of our former planning commissioners, Jay Hoffman, for his 15 years on the Planning Commission. And then we will also have an update from the Genesee District Library Director, David Conklin. We will have a public hearing for truth and taxation, and our Chief Assessor, Becky Salvati, will be here to explain those. I don't know that we need to discuss anything on that right now, or Dennis, did you have anything that?
Just for preparation for it, Director Salvati did bring just a background that came right out of an assessor's manual that I had Megan print off and put at each board member's place, and it just says a little blurb about the tax rate and a little bit of information about the Headley Amendment. So in front of you, you should all have one of these handouts. If you do not, let me know and I'll make sure we get you one. But it does just kind of talk a little bit about what we're facing, and I know there will be some confusion. A lot of that has to do with the legalities behind it and the way we're required to word things. I know we're going to get questions because we get questions every year, and they see an increase when it's really a decrease in the actual amount from the year prior, but there's some logic behind it, and there's some legalities behind it that we're required to do. So this helps explain it a little bit, and then Becky will be here. You guys saw the PowerPoint in your packet. She's going to walk us through the PowerPoint to help show residents exactly where and why those villages are where they're at.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lamata. We will have citizen comment, approval of the minutes, consent agenda. Not sure if we want to discuss anything on the consent agenda, but future positioning, we will talk about the fire department task force issues, the operational issues. Again, it's a resolution to authorize the levy of our tax millage. I know some of the wording on that. I know I received a resident phone call with regard to how that's worded, and Ms. Salvati and Mr. Limita will discuss that requirement. We don't necessarily like how it has to be worded either, but we don't get to set all the rules, just some of them. And that's not one of them. Am I moving too quick through this? Anything on the truth and taxation again, Mr. Limita or Mr. Laddie? Do we need to cover on that at this time, or?
No,
cover that on
I'm
Thursday?
looking forward to Ms. Savati's presentation, and again, I think Mr. Limita and Ms. Savati will probably take us through those irritatingly worded items.
Okay. Next on the agenda will be a resolution to approve a road closure on Pollock Road for the Genesis Boo Dash 5K race on October 21st. I saw the Pollock Road on the agenda and I got kind of excited. I don't know if any of you realize, but we probably receive 2 phone calls a week with regard to wanting Pollock Road repaired.
Mr. Supervisor?
Yes.
So I took a look at this and I was concerned about the light of the day, but this race is over by 6 and dusk is at 7:11, so that was a concern that I was thought about. But the other one is exactly the one that you're considering here. I mean, are we inviting people to do this Boo Dash through potholed, dangerously potholed portion of Pollock Road? I don't know. I'll drive it the next 2 days.
Well, maybe we can get the road commission to fill the potholes before the race, so at least it'll last for at least the race.
I have a meeting with the road commission before then, so several of them, so I'll bring that concern to them as well. It did occur to me, that issue.
Yep.
Mr. Chief?
Yes.
Is that the rough part of the road, is that near the hospital?
Yes.
Okay.
The next item on the agenda, item C, the board will consider resolution to approve the amendment to the 2017 General Fund Appropriations Act. Mr. Limata?
Sure, and Director Zostak is here from the Finance Department. And what you have before you is, and for the new board members especially, because it's the first time we've done a budget amendment since they've been seated, what they're seeing is that this format and this resolution is where we take and we have to move some money around. What you're seeing primarily here is making some adjustments. We did not fill the planner's position yet this year, and so you're seeing us move some money from what was allocated for the planner over into the legislative board to pick up a couple of things, the supervisors, healthcare, and then the other item was the board had made a motion to do a repayment of the in lieu of that was missed for a former supervisor, and those amounts are being transferred in from the planners. You're also seeing some budget transfers between accounts within finance. The $508,000 that you're seeing from public services is authorizing us to be able to pay out the money from the Concord Green street paving bond project. And below that is a $1 million amendment to appropriations, and that really is for allowing us, as we had discussed earlier this year after the CAFR came out, that spend down in our general fund. We want to take that $1 million and earmark it towards the OPEB unfunded liability buy down. Those are what's before you this evening, and I don't know if I left anything out, Kathy.
Chairman Bennett?
Yes.
So I guess I have a question. Most of that stuff was very straightforward. I think that there was some kind of a typo in the table that's going to be fixed. But the $1 million, so what we're basically saying here is that we're carrying an extra $1 million in the general fund, and it's not going to cause us any issue in particular to transfer that to the OPEB, to cover OPEB.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Mr. Massey?
Have you finished, trustee? Is that normally a standard procedure?
So, Trustee Massey, it's a good question. So what you're seeing here, and of course the board has given us direction over the last couple of years as we started to address our unfunded actuarial liability, especially where it comes to OPEB or in the defined benefit pension plan for the police department. And so we look at our general fund reserves, and we've board mandate to maintain between 12 and 15% of annual operating expenses in our reserve, so that we can, meet our obligations should the worst happen and we have some kind of stutter step in our revenue sources. So to maintain that balance, we do. Now last year, and I don't remember the exact, it was like 1.1 or 1.2 million dollars, Kathy, if you remember from last year that we did the same thing. We appropriated the fund balance down to take it. And this year we looked at it after our CAFR, and they came back and said, hey, you guys have about $1.7 million in there that you are able to spend down and still stay within the board mandated 12 to 15% range. And so that's what this is. We wanted to earmark that $1 million early for OPEB because that is one of our hot button issues. And it's also mandated by the board that we're gonna keep that fund balance within the mandated limits, but yet any excess that we want to put it directly towards our unfunded liabilities, and that's what this does.
Mr. Guzak?
Yeah, and then, of course, that is not going to be transferred until the end of the year, right? So just in case we do need those funds, we can use it for other things. We just have to go back in as a board and say, okay, things have changed. We can't put a full million toward it because of this situation. So you're earmarking it ahead of time, but we can always, it's not dispersed until the end of the year when we know we're safe and complete.
That's correct, Treasurer Guzak. And we also, I said 1.7 million, and we talked about the up to $700,000 to be earmarked towards the police pension,
Right.
The defined benefit police pension unfunded liabilities. That isn't in this amendment because we were investigating, and Kathy's been working on taking a look at, is there a way for us to make sure that when we move that money over there, it doesn't lower our contribution rates? Because what happens is we've agreed to take the full impact of the actuarial assumptions changing so that we're paying more, and the employee's also paying more to bring down that liability. If we just put the money over and transfer it over there, it benefits, all of us, of course, but it also brings both the amount we're required to pay down and the employee's amount, percentage of their payroll to pay down, and then we end up having less impact. So we're looking at different funding vehicles. Can we transfer over that $700,000? It still goes directly against the unfunded liability in the pension plan without automatically lowering our required payments, because we'd rather keep those up where they are so that we're more aggressively going after that unfunded liability. It gets us moving in the direction for a fully funded pension plan quicker.
Chairman Bennett?
Yes.
Isn't there some way that we can establish a certain threshold so that, that those reductions in contributions wouldn't apply until, say, after the pension obligation was, 60, 70, 80% met, something like that? Could we put something like that in place and not have to deal with this as we do what we think is the right thing to decrease it, but yet have to deal with this?
I'll defer to Mr. Lemata.
And I'll defer to Director Zostak, because that is exactly what we looked at to see how we can do it. We paid down last year, and you saw the impact come down on both our contribution rates. And so this year, we didn't want to just do the same thing. We learned from, we're old dogs, and we still learn new tricks once in a while. And so, Director Zostak, if you want to answer that for Trustee Mansour.
Yeah, that's exactly. I just had a conversation today with a MERS representative, and that's exactly what we're going to do by putting this funds. They call it right now there's a special or category set up for each employee group within MERS, and this will be set in a separate category. So it will only be used to buy down that unfunded liability. It won't reduce our contribution rate. They'll exclude that from the actuarial valuation when they determine the contribution rate. You can also set like a minimum contribution rate, like in union contracts. I'm not sure if that's specifically addressed right now in the union contract, but you could say that, it's cannot go below 8%. The employee would still have to contribute 8%, and it can't go below that.
So I follow up a question here. So when we look at the amount of the portion of the unfunded liability that's funded, will we still be able to accumulate in this separate account? Because we're judged, by certain thresholds of how well we're funded or not. Because it's in a segregated account, will we still be able to count it toward that?
Yes, a segregated account will still count towards the funded portion. Okay. So yes, our unfunded liability will still be decreasing.
Fine.
But it won't have an effect on the employer or employee contribution rate.
Okay.
Yep.
And that is allowed.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, MERS specifically had that just recently set up because of requests from other municipalities as well. They're making additional contributions, but yet, they're not seeing the impact that they want because it's reducing your contribution. So if your contribution rate goes down, you're still going to have this long period of time before you can fully fund it.
Even further.
And so, if your intent is to fully fund it, you want that set aside and excluded from the determination of the contribution rate.
Mr. Guzak?
Yeah, the only other question I had is when we set that aside, we can change the dollar amount each year, right? Because every year, calendar year is going to be different. Some years we can put more money, some years we can't. And we don't want to lock into a higher number that it's going to force us into an issue.
Exactly. You can still set aside.
Every year we can adjust it, right?
Put an additional contribution. There's no requirement to make an additional contribution.
I didn't think there were, but I want to make
It is up to
sure.
the municipality if they want to set aside whatever dollar amount they want.
Right.
Mr. Massey?
That was my question,
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Lemata?
And actually, one other thing too, when I spoke with them today, they said that if any point in time you want to pull, you have these reserves set up in the separate account, if you want to use that to actually reduce your contribution rate, you can as well. So you can, have it go the other way as well. Say you have, having a year where you don't want to
Right.
have a high contribution rate, you can actually pull those from those funds and apply it towards your contribution rate as well.
But, you know, that's the point that's important, is that we want to build it and keep our contribution rates up so we can be more aggressive about paying down that liability. If we get to a point where the board is comfortable and we want to move that back in and bring the contribution rates down, then that makes sense, and we can contractually negotiate, you know, limits on that if we want. Right now, contractually, we have agreed to take what MERS brings to us as the full impact of the changes in actuarial assumptions. So our contracts read that when they come back in and give us our actuarial valuation, they say, man, based on the new assumptions, we came down a year, or we changed the rate of return. It looks like you guys should go up 0.2% of your payroll, you know, towards that, and it's split equally between the employer and the employee. We've agreed to take that full impact on, so we're trying to be more aggressive, and the employees have been very agreeable about it. I mean, they understand the impact to their own pensions, and they want to do it too, and I think this just gives us a vehicle to not lower those artificially while we're still trying to be much more aggressive in the pay down.
So I have a question. This is kind of it's off of the OPEB thing and gets into some of the nitty, because once you open up the budget, yeah, you get a chance to see it all. I happen to notice there was a line item in there for overtime for planning. And I was just curious as to why we would have budgeted overtime for planning.
Why we didn't budget any?
Why we would.
Well, right now we have one employee in planning, Maria Brown. So there are times, because she also is responsible for zoning, Board of Appeals, Planning Commission, but we have her do work outside of her 40-hour week. But I can tell you that some of the numbers that you saw in there came about. She had been authorized by the former supervisor to work overtime during Perry House open houses. So she was able to, she would actually work and be on the clock to go out to assist in the Perry House open houses as a liaison between the township and the Perry House. I wasn't aware of that until we had a conversation earlier this year that she'd asked about the overtime, and that it had been authorized a couple years prior, and she'd been using it for the last few years from the former supervisor. So that's why there was overtime within that line item.
Do we see that continuing going forward because of our split responsibilities, or is that something that we're going to kind of...
That's where, I mean, that's where we had to really start setting up a cost center for the Perry House and really start impacting the budgets for our planning purposes, because there's been a lot of things like that, Trustee Mansour, where things that just had to be done got done, and they were not necessarily assigned to the Perry House. So yeah, we're trying to get a much better handle on all of the costs associated with the operation of the Perry Homestead and Nature Trails.
Thanks.
I can say that last week I had a meeting in Lansing, and one of the invited guests to this group was the policy director for Governor Snyder, and the OPEB issue isn't going away. That they plan to focus future legislation on how municipalities are handling that issue. They feel it's a huge dark cloud over many municipalities, and they want to make sure that they aren't overlooking, but they aren't going to cede the responsibility of the municipalities either. They don't want to penalize those that are doing a good job for the sake of those that might not be. So I think, you know, we're going the right direction by continuing to address the issue each year.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
will the townships have any input?
Sure.
Okay.
Yes. I'd contact your state rep, or, you know,
Chairman
give you probably
Bennett.
the email address for the policy director if you'd like to send them.
Yes, absolutely. Okay.
Chairman Bennett, the
Yes.
MTA probably is
Yeah, MTA would be
lobbying
another
on
vehicle.
our behalf as
Sure.
well.
Very good point. Okay. Next item on the agenda, under operational issues, the board will consider a motion to approve the renewal of the Consumers Energy Company gas and/or electric franchise ordinance. This ordinance renewal will allow Consumers Energy to continue to conduct business in Grand Blanc Township for a period of 30 years. Mr. Laddie?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have, believe it or not, we've been talking about consumers and various options for lights and things, which has been, again, on our agendas several months ago. As a matter of coincidence, it turns out that our 30-year previous franchise ordinance for consumers is set to expire. And so they've submitted a new version of it that runs for 30 years, which is very similar to the version that we had 30 years prior. It is a requirement to allow utility to operate a franchise, a non-exclusive franchise in the township. And so that's what's in front of you tonight. It does not have anything to do with choosing lights or fixtures or anything like that, other than just to as a baseline to acknowledge that consumers is, for lack of a better term, licensed to do business in the township by a franchise agreement. And so that's what you have in front of you for Thursday night.
Mr. Massey?
Mr. Chair, I have a question for you, Attorney. Anything less than 30 years have ever been thought of what this 30 years really means?
That's a good question. I will tell you this. I've reviewed them recently for Atlas and Davison in our previous agreement, and they are all 30 years. So I will see if I can find out what the magic is to the 30 years. Maybe that's a period of time where everyone just forgets where they were in the past.
Another generation.
Chairman?
Yeah.
Chairman Bennett?
Yes.
So I saw that as well, Trustee Massey. 30 years, especially in a technology thing that changes, seems long to me. And there is some evidence that there are other municipalities, one in Georgia, I think another in Texas, that are at 15 years. So, but 15 to 30 does seem to be, you know, kind of the range that you can get surfing the internet for a half an hour. One of the, and so I thought that was long too, but given the non-exclusivity that's in there, and also given this Section 8 revocation, which I'm a little confused or maybe concerned because there's virtually no conditions in there. Usually there would be some kind of condition. It just says, you know, you can revoke this kind of when either party wants to. But I don't know if that's something that we ought to consider adding something to. But anyway, given those two things, it doesn't seem like this agreement was really that much of a risk. I would be interested, though, that, and I did see that the initial one was 1987. So it was a very good year. But have there been any amendments to it in the intermediate time?
They nearly all look the same.
Okay.
I mean, it's uncanny how.
So no amendments to this agreement in the last 30 years?
No,
Wow.
not really.
All right.
And,
Well, the other thing is that the utilities are pretty well, and we got the Public Service Commission that
Yeah.
keeps an eye on
That's
rates
in
and
there.
that kind
That's
of
in
thing.
there. Sure.
And the Metro Act feeds into it as well. So I mean, there are a lot of different ingredients that go into it. But the baseline is, and this is a real cornerstone of township law, is that anybody who wants to operate in your township has to have a franchise agreement, has to have your permission to use the right-of-ways and the public ways. And really, to me, this seems kind of like an old-fashioned nod to that concept. Because, again, we're off, the Public Service Commission is involved, Metro Act's involved, and this doesn't say anything about income sources or fees, other than it says that we'll charge rates for electricity and gas to the consumers. So it really isn't really a full picture of what's happening. And again, as we know, you can get it very, very far down the line and start talking about fixtures on lights and things like that, so, which I'm sure we'll be doing in the future.
I would be in favor of it if you still think we can get $50 per pole, per utility pole.
Well, you know what, and it's interesting you bring that up, because now we have an overlap with that small cell application that
Right.
came in, and they wanted to put it on an existing pole, and we said, you're in our right-of-way, so pay our fee. So it's all very, it's an interesting and a lot more complex than people think when they just drive down the road and see a telephone pole.
Sure. Any other questions, Mr. Laddie? Okay, the board will consider a motion to approve the request of GIS IT Director Robbie Beller to have NetSource 1 perform the township upgrade and migration to Microsoft Exchange 2016.
Missed this one?
Okay.
Item F.
All right, I think I'm looking at the one that was emailed.
The previous one, yeah.
Okay. Item E, my apologies. The board will consider a resolution to declare its official intent to issue bonds to finance the cost of the Concord Green street paving project, and that it reasonably expects to reimburse the township's advances to the project as anticipated by this resolution. This resolution and the expression of intent to seek reimbursement from future proceeds of the bonds is intended to satisfy the requirements of Section 1.150-2 of the Treasury Regulations on Income Tax, the reimbursement regulations, and the township intends by this resolution to qualify amounts advanced by the township to the project for reimbursement from proceeds of the bonds in accordance with the requirements of the reimbursement regulations. Well, that's a mouthful.
Almost the whole resolution.
Yeah. Now we need it interpreted.
Well, and again, this is just a matter, and Treasurer Guzak, certainly interrupt me if I'm missing something or you need to correct me. But this is really this happens to Treasurer Guzak and I every time we get ready to reach out for financing for a special assessment project. And as it says in the resolution, it involves a Concord Green street paving project, which is very far along as far as construction is concerned. In fact, it might be getting close to the end.
Yeah, September 15th it should be completed is their estimated date.
Yep, and as unfortunately, as is typical, we have already advanced approximately half the sum to the road commission. Now, this just allows us, this is at the recommendation of our bond counsel, because they get involved when we start to get ready to go out and solicit banks for financing. And they want to make sure that we have a resolution in place that when we get that financing, that we can pay ourselves back, essentially. It's interesting, though, we had some discussion about the amounts in our resolution. The last resolution we approved for Concord Green had an estimate of, I think, $462,000 for
yes,
for the project.
$462,000.
You see that this payback resolution is in the amount of $508,000, and that is a tip-off that you're going to see an increase in cost to the Concord Green project, and there may be a need to reimburse more back to the township. And so if you recall that amount and you see the 508, you may say, well, that's higher than the amount that we approved. It is approximately 10% higher than the amount we approved previously. And we're allowed to increase the estimated cost and the final cost in an amount not to exceed 10%. If we do exceed 10%, we have to hold another public hearing, invite all the folks in to explain in detail why the cost overruns occurred and adopt a new resolution. So we're still below that threshold, but this resolution allows us to pay ourselves back in whatever amount Earl has to advance on the project.
And then, of course, if it does go over that, we still can make another resolution to capture the extra amount, right?
We will, and you'll see another resolution when we finally get the bids from the banks, and you'll have to accept one of the bids, and it'll have all these details in it again, and it'll have the final amounts and the interest rate, things like that. So you're not done with the resolutions on Concord Green yet, but so far, and again, we've had some increases, but they're within the range of tolerance for an additional public hearing. So we'll keep our fingers crossed that it doesn't exceed that.
Chairman Bennett?
Yes, Mr. Massey.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Mr. Massey.
I have a question. What triggered the overrun?
Well, I think there were two things that happened. First of all, there was some additional stormwater drainage that had to be accounted for. And then there was, I think as recently as maybe last month, we looked at the fact that we wanted to extend a portion of the paving beyond what the road commission had initially or secondarily thought. And so that added an additional cost to the project of about, what, $35,000?
35, yeah.
And there was, and again, the accounting for the stormwater drainage, I can't remember the dollar amount that might have.
That was about 35 also.
Was it 35?
South Pump leads.
So those,
Yeah.
and those are significant. In one sense, I'm not happy that there are increases, but those are significant in tangible benefits that we're going to get. In other words,
Right.
they're paving more of the road than they originally planned for. but also they handle that stormwater management is an important, and it's a tangible benefit. It's better than them coming in and saying, boy, we just missed it, and it's going to cost more money. So there are explanations for the increase.
Stormwater, some of it had to do with sump pump leads that needed to be routed to
Yeah.
sewers.
And those go a long way to increasing the life of the road.
Right.
We've had all sorts of trouble, because years ago, people remember that sump pump lines just ran right out into the road. They would hit in odd spots. Sometimes they would hit behind a curb and hollow out portions of the road. So there's really been a concerted effort township-wide and county-wide, really, to try to properly account for that stormwater drainage. But almost every project we see, it becomes a line item.
Right.
We probably had, well, maybe a dozen of them last winter, people calling with regard to people's sump pumps that water running into the street and causing ice in the street, and then causes the pavement to erode, and it just leads from one thing to the next, and there isn't any agency really set up to go and tackle that, other than we try to accommodate it as best we can, but we're not the road commission and we're not the drain commission, so.
Yeah, the sump pumps are handled by the Genesee County. We can't touch them.
Yeah. Mr. Massey?
Mr. Chair, I have a concern about overruns. I'm always thinking that overruns sometimes are done intentionally instead of actually fairly estimated at the beginning. Because thinking aloud, I'm thinking that sometime overruns, they know this information when they do original estimate, but they say if we put everything in the estimate, we may not get the job.
Yeah, but that actually, the original estimate was done by the county. Their engineers set that up, and they just missed those two items. And then there was also an engineering fee that was on the sump pumps that normally all engineering has been waived by the county on the roads, but they do not waive their engineering and inspection on sump pumps. So we had a small amount, an additional amount for that also. But the county did present that out, so no one's to gain there. I mean, there's no reason for the county to have a low bid because they want to have the actual number out there. It was just an oversight.
And just try and explain this, is that one of the streets connects the neighborhood to the next street over.
Right.
And it's the side yards, I believe, to a couple of houses, one on each side. And somehow that section of street was missed as far as we thought it was covered. And evidently at the last minute, we found out that it hadn't been in the initial plan. And we needed it to be paved. And so
it's like it comes up to the pave, but it gets like 10 feet from the intersection. So all of a sudden you stop and the intersection is not covered. You get 10 feet of a mess.
So it's more work that wasn't covered initially. It isn't that the cost of the current work just exploded. It's that they found additional work that needed to be done that evidently it wasn't part of the plan. We know it wasn't. And so in order to do this much more work, that's what added the cost. It wasn't that their estimate blew up and inflated. It's that we found additional work we want to have done. And the sump pump thing, I'm glad they found it and are going to tackle it, because it would just lead to huge problems after the fact. This extra section of road, if they don't do it, it would never get done because it doesn't belong to the next subdivision.
Chairman Bennett?
Yes.
So I appreciate Trustee Massey's point, because you could say that if it was the first time that they'd ever done these estimates, then, oh yeah, we missed the fact that we have to connect A to B. Right. Otherwise, it could very well, I could see your perspective very clearly, right, that they just assumed, and they know they have a 10% overage anyway, and so there you go. So
I'm not trying to be an apologist for the road commission.
I'm just saying that things like additional square feet seem to me,
basic.
Yeah, pretty basic.
Right.
I do have a question though, going back to the resolution here. So this talks about repaying us back, but is there anything that's necessary to be associated with this in terms of linkage with the special assessment?
Mr. Laddie?
Well, I mean, we identified we've just generally identified a street paving improvement in a special assessment district in the Concord Green subdivision. So we've identified our special assessment district in a rather simplistic way. And I think, and again, according to our bond counsel, I think that's enough connection to identify the funds and that we can reimburse ourselves.
Right, but the actual resolution is more than just this. It spells out the dollar amount and everything else.
yeah,
That was in the pack, I thought, but
Well,
maybe it wasn't.
No,
in
it was
yours.
not. It
Okay,
was,
so I
at least
can
not in the packet that I got before 5
yeah,
o'clock
there is-
today.
There is more detail than what's in here, and I'll get you a copy of that.
Thank you.
But that's just in our last resolution. Hey, you guys didn't pass it. I think the previous board did.
No, I'm talking about the 508 for reimbursement. Okay, that one, it is like a page and a half from bond counsel.
Well, it's on the dais, I think.
Right, but I think he
we
was
didn't see
referring
it.
to just Schedule E. That's the only thing he was looking at. He
Oh.
didn't get a copy of the actual
It should be in
resolution.
your stack of documents.
Yeah, there
I'm
you
sorry,
go.
Okay.
I thought that was.
Yeah,
Okay.
And just parenthetically, we had talked about the exact problems that Trustee Massey and Manswer brought up. We are, I think, going to explore the idea of creating
Yes. I thought about bringing
some additional oversight on our special assessment projects that maybe will encourage more communication and better communication between the county, the engineers, and the township, because we like you saw that there seemed to be these are miscommunications, at least the length of the road versus the sump leads. But we're going to try to, I think, I want to see if we can explore the idea of creating a liaison
Yes.
for each project that works directly with the residents and the township and the county,
Right.
to see if we can eliminate these kinds of issues.
right.
Well, our DPW, does as much as they can to, but they're really not road builders to oversee these projects. And it'd be great maybe to have somebody that works on our behalf to, how do we know that how many inches of asphalt's being put on? Unless we have somebody out there, watching and taking a look at how things are happening, or sump pump leads are handled the way they should. Mr. Guzak?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that this is the first time this has occurred, because if it would have occurred, we would have put something in place. We've never had this much, so I don't know if there's a change at the county or not.
The thing that I see too, and maybe it is the first time, I don't know, but.
From what
yeah.
for the last 8 years.
But all I know is that when somebody's paying, substantial, and some of these are gonna get even more substantial if they elect to do their streets. If I'm paying $10,000 or $20,000, I'm gonna hold the township, even though we're not responsible. They look to us to say, hey, my road's falling apart. Well, I would like to have somebody that is watching and for our
Right.
township residents, and we're bonding it, so.
Actually, we're just the finance.
Right.
Okay, we're just helping out the residents, because they can't get
Exactly.
this bond. There's no way they can go out with 52 people and get a loan to do this. That's why we're entitled to have the opportunity to help them. It's all on the county, because it is a county road, and so it's.
But to a certain extent, we help facilitate, between the county and.
we're the middleman.
But we're not in the road business.
No, exactly, we don't necessarily want to be. Mr. Limita?
In this particular instance, like the sump leads, in spite of everybody's best effort, we don't know where those are until you start digging that up, because people have changed it, they had issues, it's been changed, and we go into it thinking that we know where they are, what we're gonna run into, but you've got people who have tied two houses together, they're not coming up where they used to be, they got together and paid somebody to come in and change it because of some flooding issues. So when we get in there, that's when we find this out. So that one was really there's no way to anticipate that. As far as shorten where the road connection was going to be, how far they were going to go, this went back to when Director Sears he sent a map of the area to the road commission to say, hey, how about giving us some preliminary engineering on costs on what this looks like. And his original email actually said, and can you show us where the logical intersection would be, or the end would be on the road? And he, of course, had colored it in to show that what we were doing. Well, when the road commission sent it back, they said it will be paved up to this intersection.
Right.
And so that's what we assumed, that it meant it was gonna be paved up to the intersection. But in the bid packets for the guys who bid on doing the road project, what they had was a map of what Director Sears had initially put together with the line of where, this is the portion that we need to do. And so it shorted it that X amount of feet. Again, miscommunication, should we have caught that? I mean, again, we're not overseeing the project, we're the finance arm of the project. So, David's point is well taken, is that, somewhere along the way, the only way we found out about it was when the actual contractors are on site and they start telling residents, well, no, it actually ends here, and they're putting markings down, and the residents are saying, well, why would it end in the middle of the run? Why wouldn't it end at this natural intersection right here?
Right.
And that's how we were notified of it. Otherwise, we would have had no idea.
Right.
Mr. Massey?
Mr. Chair, based on your comment, Superintendent, if the residents saw asking question why it should end here and not here, that's a red flag. It tells me that the original civil engineer that was out there, he had very little knowledge of what he or she was doing. That's what that tells me. When you can take a resident and this resident is questioning it, and then it requires further study.
Right.
That tells me that the original, the county?
Right.
The county-
That's why we may want to have our own
Right.
person
Yeah.
looking at those things. Because we really don't have anybody on staff that
Right.
oversees those kind of projects, so that's why we may want to have it. Mr. Guzak?
Yeah, I just had a suggestion, because I know the GIS does this all the time, and I thought they did it on all of them, but they can go in and pull up that subdivision, and Robbie can go in there and code it, and he can highlight it right to that intersection, and bam, it's done, and they can't get out of it, because it's got our plat map, it's got the yellow on it, and that's it. And I think, I've seen them do it on other ones, I don't know what happened on this one, but that's one way to stop it, because that way, because we had another subdivision farther out where they only did 2 or 3 streets like this one, and they had one that actually went down a street and stopped right in the middle of the same street because the people on the other end didn't want to pay for it, and so the assessment was only half that street going down. And I think you did a map on that one that actually showed the color. It actually went up. I saw that one. But
Mr. Laudy?
Well, I think that's a perfectly good idea. I think we kind of had that.
Right.
Again,
That was at Holly
if we had that
Springs.
GIS map, it's a matter of getting it to the county.
Right.
And getting them to look at it again
Right.
and again and again.
Right.
And when the bids go out, confirming that
Right.
package is accurate. And that would be a pair of eyes that the road commission doesn't currently have dedicated, nor
Right.
do we. And again, it would be per assessment.
Simple.
I mean, there are
Be
people
simple.
that you can hire to do that. But getting us producing information and sending it to them,
Right.
that's only one step of the project or process. You have to make sure that they get it and that they're going to implement it.
Right.
Oh, I know, but
So we're
that
gonna,
way, Mr. Shears wouldn't have to highlight it. It would be off GIS. The system would take it lot by lot, and there's no way it could halfway stop.
I'm confident Mr. Lima is gonna handle this and come back to us with suggestions for future road
Okay.
projects.
Yeah.
Anything else? Okay. Next item, board will consider a motion to approve the request of GIS IT Director Robbie Beller to have NetSource One perform the township upgrade and migration to Microsoft Exchange 2016 for $12,167.50. This item will be paid from Computer Contractual Services Budget Account, and you see the number there, 101-228-818-100. Mr. Lemata?
Sure, and Director Ballard is here this evening as well. If you guys recall last month when we were asking for approval to move forward with the Microsoft Exchange 2016 and then some software upgrades, at that time, Director Beller and Charles had looked at it and said, we can save a considerable amount of money if we can do this, bring it online ourselves. And once it got here and after further review, he's of the impression that they can still do that. It's probably going to take a considerable amount, maybe 2 months to roll this whole thing out, and in the meantime, who does the normal routine everyday work that they're doing. It was much more involved than they had originally anticipated. So we had them go out and get a bid to do it. And, you know, these are folks who, again, NetSource, we're very familiar with. They work with us now. They can online remote access in and assist us through issues. So it's somebody who not only do we trust with our data and with our system, but somebody we have a working relationship with. We do have money in the budget that is available to pay for this item, and if we decided not to go this route, Director Beller and Charles can move forward with it, just knowing that we probably will assuredly have some overtime issues and some slowdown on our regular production issues in doing so. So, and Robbie's here to answer any questions that you guys may have for him.
And we went out and got 3 other bids, and they estimated anywhere from 90 to 120 hours of work that they would have to perform. And for us to do that over the course of a few weeks like that would be difficult to maintain the day-to-day operations. And with an organization like NetSource One or some of these other ones, they do these upgrades on a regular basis. For us, it might occur every 8 to 10 years. So they're more knowledgeable of all the best practices for implementing and migration of systems like this. So looking at that, we felt the best route to do these upgrades, and since Outlook and the Microsoft Office software is vital to the organization, getting that up and running as quick as possible, this would be the best route to take.
Any questions? Concerns? Mr. Guzak?
And this would also help because when you're transferring those files, they do back up and they do a lot of their procedures to make sure that it's
Yeah,
installed
they're doing
correctly.
everything, making sure everything's
It's correct, right?
configured correctly and everything. And
Right.
a lot of the migration from the other mailboxes would have to occur on the weekend. So there'd be overtime for us if we had to come up here. But like Mr. Limita said, they can remote in and monitor that on the weekend. So.
Right, and they can probably do it with a team of guys that
Oh, yeah,
are coming
team of
in.
guys
Instead of
rather
2
than-
guys doing it,
Right.
they could have 4 guys on a weekend linking in on their computers and fixing the whole thing,
Correct.
right?
Yes.
Very fast and be efficient.
I know the answer to this, but we have a warranty on their work as well, right?
Oh,
So,
yes, they're not going to stop it until it's
so everything's
complete.
going to be completed, and
Yes.
we have somebody to hold accountable if
Correct.
there's data missing or it's corrupted or something along those
Right.
lines. Okay. All right, sounds good. Thank you, Mr. Beller. And last item is the board will consider a motion to approve the ACH and electronic transfer policy. I don't know, Mr. Limita?
Again, and Kathy's here as well, but Treasurer Guzak can certainly speak on it. This is in response to our auditors who highlighted the fact that on a best practice, that the folks right now who are initiating and finalizing any of our ACH wire transfers, bank transfers, all do it out of the finance, and it's basically Yvonne Wagner, our senior staff accountant, and Kathy Zostak as our finance director. Their best practice was that we have somebody who doesn't have access to the ledger and who would normally be the treasurer. So if you look at the policy that was written, it has been run through past the auditors. They did approve it, but the idea being behind it is that if these guys are going to initiate transactions, that it would go to the treasurer's office to finalize those transactions, just to make sure that there's a checks and balances in there. So that's really the gist of the policy.
Mr. Guzak?
Yeah, one other thing I wanted to comment on is all these items, I have seen all these items and I have initialed all these items. I just haven't done the electronic transfer part, okay? So once we see them, you know, they actually complete it. So it's not like we haven't seen all these items. I've seen them all. The only thing I haven't seen is the ledger part, and normally the CPAs look at the ledger to see if it matches back to the other items. So that's why we didn't have a concern. But since they brought that up, we're gonna, you know, tackle it. But you're not gonna see much different in the reporting or anything. And we've been double checking it all along. So it's just a different way of doing it.
Yeah, it's nothing illegal, nothing incorrect. We're not violating any rules, but it's about a best practice, and that's where the recommendation came down to. And really, Director Sostak did the research and put the policy together. So any questions specific about the policy, Kathy, I'm sure would be happy to answer for you.
does the transaction? Who does it?
So,
Well, currently, right now, it's my department, myself and my senior staff accountant are typically the ones who approve it. And the staff accountant position also has access to approve it. So we are actually, the banking system has a dual control on it anyways. It won't allow only one person to make a transaction. Right now, it requires two people. So, but one of them are typically one of my staff members and myself. And what the auditors are saying that for, your best internal control policies, it shouldn't be an individual, both of us doing that transaction, who also has access to make journal entries. Because, if somebody wanted to commit fraud, they could make the transaction, make a journal entry to match, and it probably wouldn't be picked up on for a while. So what they're saying is that for best internal control policy, we should have that segregation of duties. So it would still be initiated by my department,
Yes.
but the final approval of it would go to the treasurer's office.
Okay.
Okay. Any questions, Mr. Solstad? Very good. Thank you.
thanks, Kathy.
And then on Thursday, we'll talk about what we're hearing from the community. We'll have some reports from our board and some management reports. An executive session if needed. Mr. Lemeter, Mr. Laddie, do you have anything for this evening?
I do not.
I have been, I've been told by the building official that there is a builder or contractor who I've had some meetings with that intends to come on Thursday night to voice his opinion on his experience with the building department. Just giving you guys the heads up, he will give us 3 minutes of time. Ted Shapansky, as building official, will be here. I would encourage you not to get into open debate during the public comment, but we would certainly address it at an appropriate time within the agenda when it comes up, to provide you an overall feedback. And I will certainly do it in my management report of the meetings we've held up to date. It has to do with some building code enforcement issues.
Okay. Very good. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn the meeting.
Support.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Bobby, please come forward.